Services panel. Item 1 is apologies, Liz.
We've received apologies from Councillor Chris Holly and Helen St John, Chair.
Lovely. Are there any others? Okie dokie. Disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. Are there any? Liz will hand out the relevant form if that's... Are there any? No. Prohibition of whipped votes and declaration of party whips. Anyone want to raise anything on that? No. Minutes of the previous meeting. We had one set on the 5th of September and a letter to the Cabinet. Okay. We go through page 1, page 2, and page 3. I sign them as true record.
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Item 5, we're going through this like a rate of knots, aren't we? Oh, yes. Could you introduce yourselves? Sorry, I did tell you that, didn't I? Okay, should we start here, Alan?
Yes, it's Alan Jeffrey, it is, Councillor Uplands Ward.
Lovely, thank you.
Dave Howes, Director of Social Services.
Thank you.
And my name is Councillor Michael Locke. I represent Scrutiny.
Sian Rowlands, Principal Social Worker, and I currently manage the Mental Capacity Act team.
Teresa Edwards, I'm the team manager for the Deprivation of Liberty Safeguards team in Swansea.
Amy Hawkins, Head of Adult Services and Tackling Poverty.
The red one.
That one. Tony Beddow, independent member of Adult Services Scrutiny Panel.
And Liz and myself, Chair, Councillor Sue Jones. Thank you all. Item 5 is public questions. Are there any? None?
Hang on. We haven't introduced ourselves online, Sue.
Oh, right, oh, okay.
Don't forget us. No. I'll go first then. Councillor Jeff Jones, Dunburn and Clay Ward.
Councillor Victoria Holland, Parliamentary Guide.
Thank you.
Councillor Paxton Hood Williams, Fairwood.
Councillor Mark Tribe, representing Llangefelic and Balindra.
Hi, and Councillor Louise Gibbard, current member for Care Services, and also Dunbar.
Thank you. Welcome. Okay, we go to item number 6, the Director of Social Services Annual Report. Dave, is you leading on this item?
Yep, thank you, Chair. I mean, hopefully, councillors are aware that I've already presented the report to council, so I don't want to re-rehearse what was a reasonably lengthy description at that point. I suppose what this is an opportunity for is for the Scrutiny Committee to ask any specific questions, either things that they didn't pick up on at the council session, or in reflection following the council session, or having had a further opportunity to look at the report. I suppose I'd summarise the last year. I mean, first thing to remind you of is it is a report to council reflecting on the delivery of your or the council's social services functions for the previous year. And it's always the case, isn't it? By the time I present something to council and by the time you consider it in this committee, we've moved on into the new year and you're already focused, as are we, on performance this year. But it is an opportunity to pause and reflect from the previous year. If I was going to overall summarise and characterise that year and the performance in relation to that year, I think it was last year really that we started to see some recovery in earnest from that period of COVID. So we saw the numbers of people whose care and support needs that we were able to support, to returning to something like we would expect the numbers to have looked like pre-COVID, albeit their presentation was still different. We're still experiencing the impact that there has been on the population of that extended period of of such significant disruption, and that plays through in terms of the types of presentation that people have. That, I don't know if I picked an example, that might be around the level of frailty that an older person might present with, given that they've had long periods where they would have been subject to lockdown, as opposed to having the usual levels of exercise and being out and about. So that still plays through now, as does that significant disruption to health services and the fact that really health services are still almost at the beginning of that recovery. If we think about waiting lists and all the kinds of things that you're all cognizant of, even if you just read the papers, that's still impacting significantly. In the last year, it still impacts today. I think what we also see, as well as that recovery in terms of the numbers of individuals that we're supporting, albeit with different presentations, it's also evident, I think, that the adaptation that necessarily took place and then has continued in our, I suppose, our models of care and support, and the way that services have adapted to try and both recover and respond to change presentation. I think that plays through as well. So it doesn't look exactly the same. I don't think it will look exactly the same, if ever, but certainly not for some time. Things are just different now. They're different for our population. They're different in terms of our, the requirements that we have to be the best that we can be for our population. But overall, last year was very much characterised by recovery, and I laboured the point in council, and certainly in some of the feedback that councillors gave. At the heart of all of that is the extraordinary efforts that our staff have gone to carry on being the best that they can be, to adapt, to be as resilient as they can be, whilst still grappling with what at times have felt like absolutely overwhelming demands. And I think that plays through as well in terms of the performance. If you dove into some of the specifics around the performance information, I'd say, and I'm sure you would say, well, it doesn't look exactly as we would like it to look. It's not. Some of the numbers don't look exactly the same as the levels of performance that we would have become used to pre-COVID, but they are an accurate and reasonable reflection of the circumstances in which we've all found ourselves, and they do point to extraordinary efforts by everybody concerned. And I continue to commend those efforts by the staff that have all done extraordinary things and proved themselves to be extraordinary resilient. That's probably it from me as a kind of introductory context setting, but I'm sure some of the members of the panel may well want to dive into some of the detail, which is absolutely fine.
Thank you, Dave. Louise, do you want to add anything before we go to questions?
Yeah, not particularly. I made some comments at full council, obviously, just to repeat my thanks to Dave for his report, and obviously his ongoing leadership, and that filters down to the heads of service, the team leaders, and all the teams and all the staff that we have who are working incredibly hard. I don't think there's any surprises in the report, really. We bring this performance information to Scrutiny regularly, and you'll have seen we'll have discussed a lot of the themes in there on a monthly basis. So yeah, thanks again to Dave for the report, and the committee, the panel, for taking it.
Thank you, Louise. Are there any questions? Who's that? Jeff, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Sue, and thanks, Dave, and Louise. Really, I don't know how many times you've actually presented this report, but I know it's gone to council, I know it's gone to audit that I've been, and now it's actually here as well. Anyway, thanks for the report. yeah, I endorse what you actually say with regards to, the workforce, the performance and so on. One thing, perhaps not a negative, I know you actually mentioned in the report that, there's going to be pressure on public funding and grant funding, could be, well, hopefully not in jeopardy. But, with regards to the workforce, although they're actually, an excellent performance and so on, and I don't mean this as a negative, but really, it's quite a high lot of sickness actually with the workforce. Now, I think the main cause is pressure and so on. Is it the fact, the conditions they're actually working under, and how can we actually improve, the health and the well-being really of the workforce actually going forward, with if there is pressure on funding and pressure on grant funding and so on, this sickness really is a pressure again actually on the budget. And do you want to? I got a couple of other things, but I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I'll come back on that. First of all, Chair, I mean, you're absolutely right. One of the challenges for us is, and COVID reinforced that, there are significant elements of our service delivery that if you have an illness, you cannot come into work and fulfill that function, because actually, and it was very well illustrated during, with COVID, actually you're putting people's lives at risk. So that plays into the mix. But then your general comment about, this is stressful working conditions and stressful roles that our workforce have across the piece. And of course, that plays into levels of sickness absence. I think a recent report to Governance and Audit Committee, one of the analysis that our HR colleagues shared was, if you look across the workforce and analyse rates of, or likelihood of rates of absence linked to different cohorts of the population, well, one of the things that stands out is that if you have an older female workforce, actually you do then end up with some higher indicators around likelihood of sickness absence. So we do have, across again significant sections of our workforce, that is a demographic. So some of that plays into the mix as well. Then in other areas of our workforce, we have a predominantly younger female workforce, and that isn't necessarily leading to high rates of sickness absence, but it leads to higher rates of maternity absence. So there's lots of factors that actually, the combination of those working conditions, which are absolutely stressful in the way that you've described, the demographic of our workforce makes that an added challenge for us to manage. And then there is that factor that doesn't always play out in all of, in all professions around, well, if you've got those kind of respiratory type, illnesses for big sections of our workforce, that is a no-no in terms of coming into work and delivering direct care. We do have, and I think it's been presented previously, but we can come back with an update and appropriate juncture. We've really tried to focus on developing, pretty sophisticated well-being strategies. Again, across the directorate, we're really pleased with how that's progressed and developed. So we're trying to do all the things that we can to keep our, very precious workforce well and in work wherever possible. We also focus on making sure we are compliant with the council's sickness absence processes, so that we're not, I guess, just not paying attention to some of the basics around that stuff. So we're much better than we would have been perhaps 5 years ago around doing the basics well. We've developed much more sophisticated approaches to trying to support staff well-being, but it's always going to be an area where you will have an above average level of absence for a variety of reasons. But it's a strong focus for us. I suppose that's the only reassurance that I can give.
I think perhaps in the future it would be nice to know the strategies that you've got on well-being for the staff, because they are our best asset, aren't they?
Absolutely, and happy to make sure we bring something back to the
Lovely,
committee.
thank you, Dave. Jeff, you've got any more questions?
Yeah, perhaps linked to that as well. I've seen changes in social services, since I started about 14 years ago now, with regards to, I can't think of the word, but really assessing people who require some of our services, from low, medium to high. I think it's all high now, the low and medium have gone, and they seem to be more reliant really on unpaid carers, people actually in the community. And I think in the audit meeting, I think we were talking about social micro and macro social enterprises. Is that something really, again, the more pressure we put on them, the more reliant we are going to be actually on them, with regards to, stress affecting them as well. So, is this an avenue really that we are going to really follow with regards to, shall we say, taking pressure off ourselves?
I'm wanting to pass this over to Amy actually to describe our approach to trying to get upstream of critical care needs. If we just concentrate or feel driven to a point where whether it's for financial resources or whether it's because it's a constant strive to respond to all of the crisis situations that come to our attention on a daily basis, if we model our service delivery around just being the ultimate safety net, then it's absolutely guaranteed that at some point it will fall over. It's, I think probably well versed, we'd have all have heard of it in different arenas, that somehow we need to start remodeling not just our public services but all public services to try and get more upstream of that critical demand. Now we'd embarked upon that in earnest pre-COVID. I think the reality is COVID probably set us back a bit. But we are renewing that approach now. There's lots of stuff that we are doing that is absolutely about getting ahead of that stream. I hope it isn't that we are just saying that's not business for us, because that isn't a safe or an appropriate approach for our population. It's more about how do we remodel the offer that we say and celebrate with our population around what the offer from adult services is. But it's less about just being that critical care response that requires that very formal assessment, financial and otherwise, and then the delivery of quite traditional models of care that we all understand, residential or domiciliary care, etc. Actually, we want much more of a generic open access well-being offer to our population, not all directly delivered by the council, but sometimes delivered by the council, sometimes facilitated by the council, but often reliant on the work that we do with partners. And yes, unpaid carers and families and communities will be in the mix as well, but that's the only way that going forward, and particularly in the context of further squeezes on public service funding, that we'll have any chance of being the best that we can be for our population and having some chance, much more chance of being that final critical safety net, as well as that being, our main offer. I don't know whether, Amy, I didn't necessarily do the best job of describing that. Did you want to add to that at all? That's it then. I hope that makes some sort of sense, Councillor.
Could I
just comment on?
Sorry, Sue. Could I just come in on what Councillor Jones and Dave just said as well? Like, I think.
Okay.
Is that okay? Yeah, just briefly, just to say, you're entirely right, and Amy presented this afternoon to the adult services staff meeting on the kind of work we're about to embark on our early help offer and things like that. So perhaps we can bring something back on that to a later scrutiny panel. But in regards to carers, I absolutely recognise the huge pressure that carers and the community are under, and I think, you know, we've talked before about encouraging carers to take up the opportunity for assessments and the support that's available for them as well, because you know, our model for the future really very much depends on everyone working together: carers, third sector organisations, community resources, our early help, and then the more statutory type services like Dave was talking about there. So yeah, so I just wanted to jump in.
Thank you, Louise. I was just going to say the LACs do a big role with this type of intervention early on, don't they? But I think, again, we have to keep on the well-being of the LACs, because at the minute, I think they're overstretched in many ways. Just a comment. Okay. Okay, are there any other questions for Dave?
Not so much a question, just as a query. Yes, thanks, David. It is the second time I've heard it. In my case, I could go a third and a fourth time. I think they get a full picture of the report. But I've glossed through it, but I haven't read every word of the 70 pages. It's in the report. But one thing that stood out for me was where we were talking about prevention and early help, and you raised the concern that you were dependent on grant funding, and if that failed, then prevention and early help would suffer. I mean, is there any kind of sort of backup plan, contingency plan to overcome that? Because I see, I mean, prevention and early help to me would be a significant feature of social care. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it is a concern for us, the extent to which, again, it's not just the council, it's any public services really, that the way the national funding models work is the reality is you get a core allowance that pretty, you know, we at least pretend will cover off our core responsibilities, and then there is you know, a host of initiatives, you know, driven by policy intent, etc., that tends to have separate, you know, short-term funding. Some of that short-term funding continues for years and years and years, but it's always a potential risk. I suppose, is it, in the great scheme of things, is it any greater a concern than the actual overall restriction on public service funding? Probably not at this stage. The reality is, for all of us, council, all other public services, it's a reduced financial envelope. So it's a bit, you know, we're all facing that challenge of how do you get absolute, you know, maximum benefit from your population from limited funding. Make sure you don't duplicate effort, try and be proactive and preventative. That absolutely makes sense. You know, be very business-like in terms of where you are either commissioning or providing services. Make sure you can absolutely justify that it's best value for doing that. You know, they're kind of basic things, but we have to keep reminding ourselves we are a very big, complicated business, and we have to be very business-like in making sure we get you know, best value from that public service funding. So no easy answers. I think in the short term, around the grant funded stuff, we haven't seen anything yet from Welsh Government that's indicated grants will disappear. What we are anticipating is there'll be cash flat. What cash flat means is that's quite a big cut given current levels of inflationary pressure. So at the moment, we're working up the contingency around how do we mitigate what is a cut? How do we mitigate that? Again, focused on what will harm, in inverted commas, our population least, and they're the bits that we'll concentrate on.
Thank you, Dave. Tony, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's a tripartite one, I'm afraid, Dave. I mean, in part of your report, you talk about the process focusing on regional big systems, and I wonder if you could say a bit more about what that entails, and add to that the role, if any, of the Care Inspectorate of Wales has in either sort of shepherding everybody along the same kind of approach, or alternatively helping individual authorities to play their individual games. And the thought that occurred to me as I was thinking about those two bits was the reference you made somewhere in the report to the difficulties of getting legal services to back up dolls. And I know we'll come back to this later. But it thought occurred to me that if there was a shared legal expert capacity that several local authorities or more shared, would that be a useful tool?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact bits that you're referring to, but I'll try and remember, you know, the sort of territory that I did. So I suppose there is something about we're not just concentrating on what are the responsibilities of the council and being very reductionist and inward looking in terms of what the kind of solutions we might be trying to try for. That is our primary responsibility, and in the end I'll be held to account in my role as to how well or not I support the council to deliver its social services functions. So if that's done badly, I'd rightly be held to account. But the role has to be, and our approach needs to be far bigger than that. We have to be much more cognizant of, first of all, being more outward looking. And our starting point for being outward looking is we can't make a social services and social care system work without, particularly in adult services, without absolutely paying attention to, well, how is a health system, you know, locally and regionally going to work? And then even when you start to consider, and I'll probably add to that, it's very difficult for us to concentrate purely on how social services might deliver its responsibilities without understanding how the third and independent sector are operating locally and within its region. You know, extend that a bit further and say, well, actually, there's quite a lot of things that are entwined between the way the system works in Swansea and the way the system works in Neath Talbot, because we are part of the same health board area. And then you layer on top of that, and I suspect I was pontificating somewhere in the report around, we also then have to pay attention to, and how does that make sense in terms of a national policy and organisational and infrastructure context, both in Wales and then in the wider UK. And then probably, I think, Swansea are have a kind of instinctive approach to be quite humble around. We don't necessarily, we do a heck of a lot of stuff that we are rightly very proud of. We don't necessarily shout from the rooftops as much as we might in terms of some of that stuff. But we are also instinctively humble around always looking for, hang on a minute, if something looks as if actually you know, whether that's a population being supported better, or a better approach to working with or in communities, or a better model of, you know, actual critical care for somebody. If we can see that appears to be working better somewhere else, our instinct is just to say, yeah, we'll go and grab that. So I don't know absolutely for sure, but I suspect it was in that sort of territory that I would have been reflecting. In terms of the legal stuff, you're right, and you could apply that to lots of things. You know, is there still more scope, particularly in Wales, which is a small country with a relatively small population, but quite a big number of organisations operating to support that that relatively small population. Is there more that we could be doing absolutely together? And that's not just across our region, which we try to do quite a lot, but across a number of regions or across a number of local authorities. And you picked on legal services as a you know, a place where you've got finite resource expertise. Would we be better off joining some of that up? Truth is probably yes, but there are a host of areas where we could do more of that. And in the end, you know, one way or another, we'll be forced to do some of that stuff. My only reflection specifically on legal services is when I first came to Swansea, there was a shared legal resource, not particularly focusing on dolls, but focusing on the whole of legal services support to social services, and in particular focused on the support to children's services. So I'm going back to the period when social services or children's services were in special measures. And actually we unpicked that arrangement or big elements of that because we ultimately concluded we needed to have more direct control over some of those more specialist services. There are still elements that are regional, but a lot of the critical functions that we're relying on, at some point we've said, oh no, we need more direct involvement because the risks of direct control, because the risks of not having that direct control was felt to lay us open to some unacceptable risks. Now the landscape has changed considerably over the period, and perhaps now is the right time to revisit some of that. But that kind of worries about how some of that was playing out in the past weigh heavy for quite a long time, because you know sticks with you when things have been tough.
Are there any more questions for Dave? Thank you, Dave. And can you pass our thanks on to the staff for all the hard work that they've done? Because, yeah, nobody goes out to do a bad job. They do a tremendous job.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. Will do.
Thank you. Item 7 now. Briefing on deprivation of liberty safeguarding. Is it Amy? Are you going to take? Or Louise?
I'm just going to introduce, if that's okay, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a technical report, so I'm sure Sean and Teresa and Amy will do a better job explaining it than I will. But just to thank the officers for preparing the report, and the panel requested a bit more information around this, so that's why we've brought it forward today. As the report outlines, deprivation of liberty safeguards are a procedure prescribed by law when it's necessary to deprive a person over 18 of their liberty to keep them safe. Mental decision-making capacity to consent to their care and treatment. So obviously this is quite a difficult area to get right, and it's important that we do so. It's underpinned by law to make sure that decisions are made in someone's best interest and that they aren't subject to any unnecessary restrictions. The local authority is the supervisory body, and our DOLS team manage this, made up of social work assessors, business supports, senior social workers and team leader, who we've got with you today. Section 2.2 there outlines how these decisions are made. Sorry, let's turn the page. And section 3 does show how the numbers of referral applications and renewals are increasing. And unfortunately, as we've mentioned before, we do have a bit of a backlog, but we are working on processes to manage these more effectively. Under the European Convention of Human Rights, anyone has the right to review this at the Court of Protection, and that's explained in section 4. Because the DOLS procedure only covers those deprived of their liberty in care homes and hospitals, in other settings like supported living or in their own home, a community deprivation of liberty must be applied at the Court of Protection. And this is quite a lengthy process, and it was hoped that the new liberty of protection safeguards would assist with this, but this has been delayed beyond the life of the current Parliament. And section 7 outlines the rationale and development of the liberty protection safeguards, but obviously this is on hold for now. However, it doesn't mean that the work that the teams have done on this has sort of gone to waste. We've been looking at how we raise awareness and improve knowledge of the Mental Capacity Act across our services and with our partners. So hopefully that's a little bit of an overview there. So I'll hand over to Amy and the other officers to kind of explain it, and I'm sure they'll be able to answer the technical questions. Thank you, Louise.
Amy.
Thank you. Yeah, we do want to just leave some time for some questions, so I won't go into it in much more detail than the councillor has. I think the the quantity and the demand that we have in this area has increased in the last few years, particularly around case law that came in, and that's meant that the volume and capacity for casework has broadened the threshold of the amount of people coming in for these authorisations. So that has, but we have put additional resource into the teams to support that since that came in, but it still is an area of high demand. The team are overseeing all applications for those in care homes, whether they're funded by the local authority, self-funded or health board funded as well. So we've got around 1,500 care home spaces in Swansea. So the team, not everybody in those will be deprived of their liberty in some way or another, but it just means the teams are supporting there. There's a large number of assessments that have to take place for every single case. Every single case is only awarded this authorisation up to a year. So it's a continual cycle of work. So I think it's just to be aware in terms of the DOLS caseload. Again, the team can answer any technical questions on this. But timely processing of the application is really important so people aren't deprived of their liberties without due process. And one of the things we are looking at, because of these backlogs, it doesn't just impact us. This is a sort of Wales-wide issue, but we are working with our colleagues in the local authorities to just consider how we can best manage the flow of applications. And we're looking at introduction of revised application forms and a way to screen and prioritise cases more effectively. So the team are continually looking to evolve and go forward with this case, with these cases. As mentioned, there's quite a lot of legal involvement, I think it's fair to say, in terms of these cases. I'll come on to the support we're doing there. What I'd like to highlight as well is that we do commission and support the approach of advocacy as well. So we commission an organisation to provide advocacy support, both for individuals who might be subject to DOLS, but also their relevant persons representative. So somebody who is a family member, friend, or anyone who's willing or able to advocate on behalf of the person where the DOLS or deprivation of liberty safeguards applies to. So that's some key aspects of the work. There's also another advocacy role around a Rule 1.2 representative. Again, sorry, the report is full of technical information, but it is, factual information. So it's there. But that's to provide support for people who lack capacity to consent to the restrictions on their freedom within the community or domestic settings. So there's, to ensure those safeguards are in place in terms of supporting the best interests of those individuals. As the report goes on to say, and as Louise has mentioned, that we were hoping this legislation would come in, which would improve the processes around the complexities, and also just making sure that there was less bureaucracy involved in it. This is something that's been highlighted, not locally. This was by a select committee in the Lords back in 2014. But as mentioned, it's been delayed by quite a while, quite a number of years. But that said, we are still moving forward, and Welsh Government has given us some grant funding and continues to give us the grant funding until at least 2025 to ensure that the key concepts and principles of the Mental Capacity Act are understood, and to help us ensure that when the Liberty of Protection Safeguard, when and if they come in, our teams are ready and we can quickly introduce these. And also the work supports us at the moment, ensuring that we're raising awareness of the Mental Capacity Act, and that's what Sian and her team are particularly focusing on as well, both in terms of awareness, training, support, consultancy as well to both our teams, but also care home staff, dom care staff, day services, school, police, anywhere where we need to make sure we're legally compliant and upholding the human rights of people. That was about the MCA team. I just wanted to mention, and the team are also writing guidance and support for the teams to support this process. So that's some of the areas I wanted to highlight. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Amy. Are there any questions for Amy? Tony?
Thank you, Chair. Just to an inquiry on the stats that were in the report and the variations across the time spans. Is there any underlying driving force that increases the referrals and then decreases them? I mean, is it a winter phenomenon? Is it driven by something else? And I'm intrigued by the by a possible pattern that might be there, but we haven't yet discovered it.
I think there are certain trends that we can actually pick out from the performance data. I think obviously the number of applications that comes into the dolls team does tend to increase during winter months, because that's the time that people are admitted mostly from hospital during the sort of the winter month period. So there's definitely a trend that we see a higher number towards the sort of a winter months really. But I think there are certain trends that I think that's one of the challenges going forward. Really, we spoke about in the regional meeting this morning, but actually identifying what those trends are and trying to be a bit more proactive and actually meeting the demands. But yeah, I think there's definitely things like winter pressures. People tend to be admitted to care homes more during those months.
Jenny, if I could just follow that up, in terms of what you might call the stability of the regular flow, do we think that that's going to be fairly stable over the coming 3 or 4 years, or are there pressures elsewhere that might require the numbers to be that require this service or this investigation to might see the numbers increasing?
In terms of the pressures coming from the sort of the care home sector, I don't anticipate that there's any particular reason why that should increase. But I think in terms of the overall demand, I think that's going to be quite similar to previous years, because the dolls authorisation only lasts for a 12 months period, and very often we set in the authorisation for much shorter so that we can offer that additional level of monitoring. You know, it does mean that every year we have to sort of revisit the whole process again, so we can sort of predict what the demand is going to be on the service sort of from one year to the next. In terms of sort of a future plan, I'm not aware of anything that should necessarily increase the levels any more than that they are now, really.
Well, if I just add to that, I mean, what I was thinking of was that I think we're in a situation where the population is getting older.
Yeah.
And that once you get beyond the age of 80, or in my case 50, the mind starts to default, doesn't it? So if we got to the stage where got a lot of people not only in their 80s but in their 90s and in their early hundreds, one would expect that would be the cohort that would find the individuals finding themselves in difficulties, or their carers and those looking after them were worried. I mean, is there anything in the demography that's likely to support that?
I mean, I certainly think that is the situation now, because I think the type of person that are going into care homes now, as perhaps compared to 8 years ago, is a very different sort of demographic. And I think yeah, you're right. With the aging population, it is likely to see more of that, really.
Thank you. Jeff, you've got a question? Sorry, Amy.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to come in just on the back of
Yeah.
the last one, another thing, just in terms of, in addition to the care homes, the community deprivation of liberty orders, with the teams are seeing an increase of this, and I think our main areas around supported living, people in supported living who lack capacity, and also mainly people living in their own homes with dementia, supported by family who might be receiving care. And again, so that's just an area we're just tracking, monitoring, looking at it, and just supporting the teams in terms of the work that Sean and her team are doing around that training, just to make sure everybody's ready, and supporting with that court work as well. If those cases that go to court, some can be done on a application procedure as well.
Thank you, Amy. Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, it was on that theme actually. I was going to ask a basic question. You know, why are the numbers actually increasing? I think you've mentioned a lot. Well, I think a lot of changes happened because of the legal case that was actually brought. You know, the people that you know, it's captured, so we say more people. So what happened before the legal ruling and so on? You know, what happened to the people that shall we say were not captured under this? And really, you know, with the new legislation, when it comes in, the LPS, that's going to bring in 16 and 17-year-olds. That's going to increase your workload as well. And sorry, I don't know anything about this really, but what about people actually under those ages? How are they actually covered?
Hello. So just in relation to what happened originally before the big Cheshire West case, that was back in 2014, and it was more in relation to if somebody was objecting to being in a care home, then they would be taken forward for a DOLS, but people who were not objecting and were quite happy, even though they lacked capacity, then they didn't, take them forward, and a DOLS wasn't, requested and put in place. But obviously Cheshire West said, even if somebody is very happy, then you still need to have DOLS authorisation for them. So everybody looked at all the happy but people in a care home but lacked capacity. And then obviously this is where we had this massive influx of applications all across the board, really. So that's in relation to that. Okay, so yeah, in relation to the LPS, so as well as it, being for the 16, 17-year-olds, it will also cover people living in supported living, living in the community in their own home, but it's a very different process to the DOLS process. So the DOLS process, we have the independent team, which is the DOLS team. Then we have Section 12 doctors, and it's allocated and they go out and do specific reports. Whereas what the LPS was going to introduce is that care management, so social workers, pick up more of those reports. Because in a way, the DOLS can sometimes be duplicating work, because a social worker has to assess capacity and make a best interest decision for the person to move into a care home. And then a couple of weeks later, the DOLS team come along and we do a capacity assessment and we do a best interest assessment. So there's a lot of duplication in the work that goes on. I'm not saying it's important, and it is good to have the independence, but obviously we can't manage this volume of work, and we're not the only one. It is across the UK. So this was an attempt really to try and standardise that, because anybody who's 16 and 17-year-old at the moment, or outside of a care home or hospital, we have to make that application to court. And as you can imagine, a court system can't cope with that at the moment. Okay, so it was all in relation to that. So what happens at the moment with people under 16? I think that was one of your questions as well, wasn't it? The application is made straight to the High Court for those at the moment. And with the LPS coming in, there's not going to be any changes to that.
Okay, thank you, yeah.
Are there any more questions? It sounds very complicated, I've got to say. So thank you very much for your presentation, and I'm sure we'll see you in the future. Oh, you've got another question, right? Sorry, another question.
Sorry, Chair, it's just that thought that's just been prompted by the previous comment. I mean, in terms of the levels of referrals under this scheme that come from this authority, are we broadly in line with the rest of Wales in terms of the numbers that we deal with and the numbers we seek to care for? And is it broadly similar across Wales, the rate at which people are being referred to this service?
Yeah, we are involved in national forums and regional forums. I suppose we see some of the performance information nationally, but it might be something we need to go off and double check actually with you. But certainly on a regional footprint, we, Sian and Teresa, are both involved in meetings and discussions with our colleagues, and we share our experience, and a bit like the work we're doing around the paperwork, to try and improve processes. But yeah, that's something certainly as a supplementary we can try and find out a bit further information.
Okay, are there any more questions? Thank you very much for your presentation and for your attendance here. Thank you. We go on to item 8 now, which is the work programme. The next meeting is on the 12th of December, again at 4:30, just for you to note. And we have performance monitoring, update of transformation and improvement for adult services, and a briefing on CLICE. Amy, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, is it possible, could we move the transformation one to the January meeting, if at all possible, just due to a clash with another meeting that we have to present at? Yeah, is that okay? And if you need to move something else off January to a further meeting, we're happy to accommodate that as well, if that's okay.
Okay, Liz and I will have a chat about that. Thank you, Amy. Okay, thank you very much for attending. Let's stop the recording. Thank you all.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you.